I want to talk specifically about the impact that the pandemic has had on India's small businesses, data which I'm sure you're very well aware of. This is more for the benefit of our viewers. Studies showing that nearly 95% firms impacted negatively during the first lockdown in 2020. 70% businesses saw some sort of disruption till mid and late of 2020. Even with progressive unlocking reports showing that nearly 40% of businesses as of the mid of last year continued seeing disruption in their business and huge levels of uncertainty. Given the third wave, what do you think is perhaps going to be the impact that we're likely to see on India's small businesses? One, and the second part of the question, can we afford to have another lockdown? And then what perhaps is going to be the solution in ensuring that the debate between lives and livelihoods, that is really being maintained?
Answer to the last question is very simple. It is no. So let me explain.
Okay.
The first wave, as I said, we had predicted that by the fourth quarter of the last year, which was FY21, it would be over. And as soon as the second wave started, we did a cross-state study covering, I think it was about 15 to 20 states, where we actually looked at the propagation, and we came to two conclusions. This was well before the medical evidence had come in.
Sure.
That this Delta virus, at that point it was not called Delta, it came to be called that much later, but that it was highly transmissible. We could conclude that from the propagation of the data in the states. And we actually calculated a percentage which turned out to be quite close to the one determined medically later on. And the main point there, which is why I'm repeating it, is that we said that the wave would rise much more rapidly than the first wave and also decline much more rapidly. That's the key issue. And that has implication from the Omicron. The Omicron is also much more transmissible, even than the Delta. So the same thing is going to happen. It's going to rise even more rapidly, spread, rise means spread, and then it's going to decline even more rapidly than the Delta.
Sure.
So that is first thing which has economic implication. You can see there will be a sharp knock, but then the adjustment will be much faster if we are prepared for the whole thing. So that's one simple implication which comes from studying the nature of these pandemics. Given that the lockdown is clearly, we had said even, I think after June, by June we had been recommending a quick removal of the lockdown, June of last year, year before last year. So clearly lockdown is not the solution. So what do our studies show? What we showed was that there are basically three, in this situation it's best to think of three different aggregate sectors. One is of course essential commodities, which is your agricultural sector, which was not affected by the lockdown. The second is what we call contact services. Services where a lot of people come into contact and therefore transmissibility can be high.
Sure.
And the third sectors were the usual manufacturing, mining, construction, etc. So what we had said was that the restrictions on the mining construction sector should be lifted very quickly. And this was actually not really understood well. And in fact, that is one of the sectors which has suffered the most. If we look at the employment data particularly, which you mentioned in your introductions, is the manufacturing and construction sector. Surprisingly, when we think of informal sector and the contact services where there was a problem, there were both natural fears of people and the closures were more affected on the trade, for example, hospitality. Everybody knows about those. But it turns out if you look at the actual employment data, which is now available till Q4 of last year, it actually shows that it was the regular wage employment, not the informal. Again, there is this perception which has been propagated by NGOs that somehow it's only the casual labor or the informal, the self-employed who have suffered the most, but there's no evidence of that. I mean, it may be true, but there is no data to support it at this point in time, except for some surveys which I'm not sure about the quality, and also very focused on the lockdown period. In the lockdown period, actually whoever had less wealth clearly suffered, because all of us, including myself, including probably you, had to depend on our accumulated savings to carry out much of the things. So lockdown is clearly was not the answer to the second wave. It's not the answer to the third wave.